Hey there, I'm Allie Astrocyte, and in this episode, how does government funding affect research on a national scale? My friend Andrea Hartzell, neuroscientist and science policy fan, is here again this week to talk about this topic.
Thanks, Allie. As we talked about in our last video, if you live in the United States, you've probably heard some of the news about the president's proposed budget. And this week, we're focusing on the proposed $7 billion cut to the National Institutes of Health, or NIH.
Cutting over 20% of the NIH's budget will have a huge impact on scientific research and technology innovation in America for generations to come. Government funding of scientific research provides jobs, generates new treatments and cures for diseases, creates new technologies, and fuels economic growth.
But how does that government funding, and NIH funding in particular, lead to these benefits for our society? Where does that money go?
Last time, we visited with some UC San Diego neuroscientists to learn about how it impacts research at one public university. This week, we're hearing about the effects of NIH funding on scientific innovation from scientists across the country. Let's meet our researchers.
Hi, I'm Brandon Cisneros, and I create methods to image the cells involved in type 1 diabetes. This is important because detecting diabetes earlier allows you to treat it earlier.
My NIH-funded research is focused on trying to understand how neural circuits are formed during the development of the nervous system. Neurological disorders can arise when neurons don't make the right connections during development. And so it's important to understand how this process happens normally and how abnormal connections during development lead to functional defects.
And my NSF NIH-funded research focuses on how our brains process sensory information, specifically how it processes pain, and is important to help us understand what goes wrong during pain disorders.
I'm mainly interested in how lifestyle factors such as exercise and nutrition impact the brain. I mean, one of the things we've learned in the last 20 years or so is just the incredible efficiency of exercise at preventing cognitive decline. And if we can understand how exercise affects the brain and promotes enhanced cognition, we can have a huge impact in communities.
I'm interested in how the brain puts sights and sounds together. So if you see a bird flying overhead and you hear its call, your brain makes a decision where it says, yeah, that call is probably coming from the bird. Thing is, that's actually kind of a hard problem for the brain to solve. We often call it the binding problem. I'm interested in how populations of neurons work together to help solve that problem. Understanding how this works could ultimately shed some light on conditions like schizophrenia or autism, where such kind of sensory processing is often compromised.
I study the role of RNA decay in brain development, and my research is important if we hope to understand the underlying cause of a variety of neurological diseases.
Thanks to taxpayers and the NIH, I research how learning and memory change in normal, healthy aging. This is important because the overwhelming majority, 86% of people over 71, don't have dementia. And for the other 14%, understanding how normal brain aging works is really critical to understand and treat age-related disease.
After I graduated from college, I received a 2-year fellowship from the NIH, which allowed me to conduct full-time independent research. There, I studied biological modifiers of normal aging, which is essential for understanding diseases such as Alzheimer's.
I study how childhood stressful experiences like poverty, abuse, and neglect get under our skin to affect our physical and our mental health. Once we understand how childhood stress affects health, we can create individualized interventions to improve health across the lifespan.
I study the cells in the eye that use light not to see the world around us, but rather to synchronize our bodies to the rise and fall of the sun. By better understanding how lights affect behavior, we hope to come up with new ways to help shift workers and people that suffer from sleep disorders and jet lag.
I work on a tumor called vestibular schwannoma, which grows in the inner ear. And so what I do is develop drug therapies to stop this tumor from growing, so hopefully patients won't have to get surgery.
I'm currently funded by a grant from the National Cancer Institute, which is part of the NIH. My research is focused on cancer metastasis, the dissemination of a primary tumor cell to other organs within the body, and this process is responsible for 90% of deaths linked to cancer. The goal of my research is to better understand metastasis so that we can find better ways to prevent, diagnose, and treat cancer.
I study ways to prevent arsenic toxicity for cells in the brain by manipulating RNA dynamics. This is important because arsenic is a common toxicant in the water supply with serious consequences for early brain development.
I study how calcium is regulated in cells, which is really important because it determines when cells turn on and off, and if that's not regulated, we can get a wider range of diseases from Parkinson's to muscular dystrophy. I'm supported in my research by an NIH training grant, so government funding is very important for me to continue my work.
My laboratory here at the Beckman uses measures of brain electrical activity to try to understand how people comprehend language. We bring people into the laboratory, put sensors on their heads that will pick up the electrical activity occurring in the brain, and we look at how these strategies are different across people and circumstances, and also how they change over the lifespan as people age.
I study a subset of immune cells, essential to prevent our immune system from attacking our own tissues, regulatory T cells. A deeper understanding of these cells and a greater capacity to manipulate them will allow us to develop new effective treatments for type 1 diabetes and transplant rejection.
The old saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, is not exactly a true statement, and we're showing that every day by studying how neurons communicate with one another, like at the synapse. A program that is funded by the NIH, like the MD PhD program, allows students like me to sort of explore our interests and our own niche that we can then take back to the public so that we can develop new therapeutics.
I'm interested in learning how your skeletal muscle affects the health of your motor neurons, which are the neurons that live in your spinal cord and reach all the way out to every single muscle you can move. This is really important because if we find a way to convince your muscle to maintain the health of your motor neurons, it would be hugely beneficial to people with motor neuron degeneration conditions such as ALS or Kennedy's disease, for which there is still no good therapy available. Cheers!
I'm currently using NIH funding at this very moment to study the process of adult neurogenesis, which is the process of new neurons being born all the time, even in the adult brain. This is important because it's important to understand the basic mechanisms of brain plasticity if we're ever going to improve brain plasticity in older adults or people with diseases such as Alzheimer's. Excuse me while I get back to my experiment.
American biomedical research spans a huge range of fields and questions, but all of these scientists in all of these places are hard at work to better understand the human body and trying to translate that understanding into real-world benefits for American citizens. Whether it's diabetes or cancer, this research is important for supporting America's future.
We need to come together as a society to tell the government that cutting NIH funding is absolutely unacceptable. This research is critical to our nation's future, and it must be protected. If you'd like to help, here are a few things that you can do. First, call your representative or send them a letter and tell them not to approve any budget that cuts NIH funding. Then, share this video around your communities to help others learn about how important NIH funding is. Finally, if you can, consider donating to an organization like the Foundation for the National Institute of Health, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting the NIH's scientific mission.
Check the description below for resources on how to contact your representative, an example calling script you can use, and a link to the foundation. Andrea, thanks for joining us to talk about this important issue.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching this episode of Neurotransmissions. If you liked it, please hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to catch more videos about American neuroscience. Until our next transmission, I'm Allie Astrocyte. Over and out.